What is happening, everyone? Tim, and Eddie, but we'll call Tim Timothy just for the sake of the listeners knowing who is who. Um,
Okay.
Timothy would be the one you'd rarely hear because his mic is really low.
My mic's really low. I'm a
um,
crooner. I'm not a
let's
belter. I'm a crooner.
doing ASMR and shit. He's
That's
so
right.
close to the mic. By the way, I haven't said I said that. Feel free to cuss or say anything you want. We are liberal here. So
Okay.
That's all you're gonna hear.
yeah, that's what I like. I mean, I did hear Eddie. I did hear Eddie curse a bunch when I talked to him in PMC, and I was like, I gotta let him speak like that. There's no way. There's no way he's holding that back. So
No way.
there we go. So fuck this shit. Let's start.
Okay.
FTS.
Yeah, Tim. Let's start with you.
Okay.
What?
This is
Yeah,
Tim without the ithy on it. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, what can I do for you, young man?
Ooh, man, so I wanna get your individual stories into Evil Genius. Like, what brought this thing together? I'll just be upfront with it. People who get together and do amazing things together, it always fascinates me because I'm such an individualist. So I'd love to get your story out and into the moment that y'all connected together, if that makes sense. So I guess
Sure.
let's start with Tim.
I was, uh, in the Metazoic age when dinosaurs roamed the earth. I was a recording artist, songwriter, had record deals. All that went away. I started writing music for television. I wrote a lot of main titles, a lot. And that was really my kind of wheelhouse for a long time. I was always writing. I started writing more for production music libraries as kind of a way to keep myself busy, um, among other things. And I did a lot of game shows as well. That kind of kept me out of trouble too. I mean, we're talking, 20 plus years at it, and if not more. And Timothy Edwards and I had always kind of bumped into each other at PRR events that our PRO CSAC would throw. And actually, I kind of was he was brought in to kind of talk to him about coming to CSAC. Anyway, we just struck up a friendship and collegial shit, talk shop as we want to do. And then the two of us, he had his own PML at the time, but the two of us started working on together on some stuff for Hallmark, and we kind of ended up building a little library. And then we got with another post house, actually production company, not even post house, production company, and have just started by working for them, having our own production music library, just kind of de facto, kind of worked in reverse. We were getting creative from the production, and then going out to our guys and having them to create on the fly, as opposed to the other way around, trying to build a library, then have people hope you have what's right. We were kind of working the other way, which is the EPs would say what they're looking for direction wise, and we just have built a library by doing that. And it's called the Team, and we've been out, getting distribution, sub pubs, and still we're on a show right now that will be on Bravo and Peacock, and we've just kind of gone show to show. I ran into Ed at the PMC. Timothy had known him for a long time, so we knew a lot of the same people, and we really were sitting around talking about. I don't want to disparage, but thinking like we have a lot of experience in a lot of different areas. Tim a little more trailer, me a little more main titles and promos. I mean, as well as just overarching production music experience. All of us have thousands of cues in production music libraries. I don't really know how many, but a lot. And we were just kind of shooting the shit over coffee, and we thought, there's a lot of insight that the three of us have that maybe actually would be beneficial to a lot of people coming up, because we've touched on so many different areas of it, as well as being production music library owners as well. I mean, we've kind of covered each side of the field, and sometimes we were wondering, we get a lot of questions asked of us just in the hallways at these kind of events, and it seemed like there was a maybe a little vacuum of like real actionable good intel. Sometimes I think people might not be realistic about the expectations, or are getting information that's just not necessarily right or even usable. So we sort of thought like, well, we have a lot of, mutual connective tissues, and is a huge wealth of experience. And maybe this is something we could just, as a team, the three of us as evil geniuses, talk about doing this and offering mentorships and hopefully some, on down the line, seeing how it expands out from there. But like good real life experience and information that we can actually just hopefully make it speed the plow for folks or give them real insights that they maybe are not getting. Maybe I don't want to disparage anyone giving advice and stuff like that, but we didn't see a lot of people at our level doing this kind of mentor type stuff, and we thought there was a place for us to kind of actually bring real value to it. Is that enough?
Everything he just said was absolutely true, except for the coffee part.
Yeah.
It wasn't coffee.
I
It
And
was
also
you
a
weren't
wouldn't
drinking
drink.
mentor.
I
coffee.
also wouldn't
I
go
had
with the
coffee.
coffee with him. Nah.
I had coffee. I always have coffee.
Sure.
All right,
So it's let's go on to Eddie. I talk too much.
Um, I mean, I started out as a recording artist, had three major label record deals, two of which I started the band. I had a deal on Epic, I had a deal on Elektra, deal on Island. I went from there into becoming a record producer, produced Anthrax, Fuel, El Nino, Smile Empty Soul, worked with Cara Diaguardi. I mean, you name it, produced a lot of metal bands, Jesse Malin, rock bands. Went from there to production music. I got into production music about 18 years ago. Some of my friends were starting libraries. I didn't even know totally what it was. I just knew that bands that I was producing got themselves into video games and TV shows, and I was doing remixes for them that ended up in Resident Evil and Fast and the Furious and all kinds of stuff. And I'm like, I don't know why I'm doing these remixes. All I'm using is their vocal track. All the rest of the music's mine. So I was like, I want to be the artist. I don't want to have to depend on bands. Producing bands is all fun and games, but when somebody in the band gets really drunk and is doing a showcase for a booking agent, the record label's there, and they tell the record label to go screw themselves when they're drunk on stage, your record gets canceled. And it's like, I work my ass off on it. So I was like, I'd rather live and die by my own sword and create my own music. And if people love it, that's great. And if they hate it, that's great too. I don't really care, as long as I can take responsibility for it. I don't feel like my whole career was ruined on some band's performance that I had nothing to do with. So I got into production music. I became the in-house composer for a small ad agency for about 15 years. Scored lots of promos with them. Uh, Done a lot of TV shows. Scored shows on networks, documentaries to picture. I'm doing one right now. Scored a lot of promos to picture. I don't even know how many, hundreds of them at this point. NBC News, Judge Judy, Rachel Ray. So I've sort of been on every side of the glass. I've been the guy in the band. I've been the producer, and I'm the composer. I sort of, have been on every side of it, and then got into publishing. I partnered with a label called Pop Machine through APM. Uh, I do A&R there for them. So I'm really on every side of it. So, I feel like I know how to talk to artists because I am one. I know how to talk to people in bands. I've been on every side. I've been very fortunate to be doing this for 30 years.
Mm, yeah, there's a lot of follow up questions from that, but let's go to Timothy and then I'll ask all of them.
Right on. So, is this okay? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, yeah.
All
Yep.
right. So, I come also from a band background. I grew up in South Florida. I went up to Boston. I went to Berkeley, got in a band. We got on the radio. We put a record out. Uh, Band broke up. Shocking. Uh, Went back to Miami to lick my wounds a little bit. Met up with a guy there. Started writing. We came out here. We had a deal out here. We got dropped off of that. That was fun. So I started pitching myself to publishers, uh, to write songs. I got really close a couple times. I was just getting really kind of, exasperated. with it. And one day, a guy that I went to high school with, who was in my first like high school kind of band, he was working audio on a show, and he actually called another friend of ours who had a really nice studio to see if he could do this thing. And the other guy wasn't available, so he called me and he said, "Hey, this show I'm working on is looking to replace this John Williams cue. It's just a short, like 5-second fanfare because it's too expensive for the show." And there's a show over being done at Paramount. It was on NBC, but it was a daytime talk show, so it didn't have John Williams kind of budgets. So they had budget from me. So I did one. I thought it sounded terrible, but I thought I'll just turn it in because I said I would do it. They ended up really loving it. They called me the next week. Uh, I did a temp roll leading up to it. There's a whole story behind that. But and then about 2 weeks later, they said, "Do you want to contribute to the show with some of the other composers?" And I was like, "I'd love to." So I started doing that the following year. I did their main title theme for that show. And then the show went off the air. And I thought, well, I guess that's it, because I really had zero idea about how any of this worked. Um, but then I got calls from two people that worked on the show that moved over to other places. And one was from a guy named Roger Fountain, who became a music supervisor over at the show Extra. And so he signed me because I met him on the first show, as I mentioned. And so I started mostly doing music for Warner Brothers, and I've been doing music for them ever since. But as I was coming up, I wanted to kind of develop. I got into film trailers through Immediate Music, who are now with BMG, I believe. And those guys were great mentors as far as production goes. And after that, I met a producer who did Dude, Where's My Car and some movies like that. And he said, "I'm doing this comedy. Would you help me clear some music?" I said, "Absolutely." Looked into how to do that, actually. So I got a music supervision credit. Then I asked him, who's scoring this? And he told me who he thought he was going to hire. And I said, "You should just hire me." And he's like, "Well, come speak to the director." I did that. And I did my first movie for Lionsgate. So I think I've done 11 feature films and 9 have been released. And so from that, I got into music supervision as well. And because I thought, you know what, I'll offer myself as a composer and a music supervisor for clearances, kind of a 2-in-1 package, if that would be useful, which kind of helped once in a while. But most of the time, it was just me, either music supervising or composing. And then, as things went on, I also got some main title themes. I did the theme for Extra for a few years. Um, and after that, I was just trying to look to expand, and I thought, instead of writing for a bunch of other libraries, which I still will do, composer, so I compose, I thought I'll start my own, and I did so with a business partner. We had it for about 4 years. Kind of took it as far as we could take it, and our distributor made an offer because they liked the catalog, and they bought the catalog off of us, and that was a time when Tim and I started working on Hallmark projects, as he had mentioned earlier. So yeah, and the other thing, I've been very active, like with the PMA, the Production Music Association. I'm the only kind of original member from the Composer Advisory Committee when they first put that together. That's why if you ever go into those kind of coffee hangouts and stuff, you always usually see a couple of us in there. There's 5 of us. But it originally was the aim of the CAC was to advise the publishers, because the PMA used to strictly just be a publishing entity, like that whole organization for publishers. Even though they were competitors, they wanted to share information so they could keep the value up in all the music, right? So I've always been an advocate for that, and for composer rights as well. So we were brought in to analyze, would it be a good move to actually invite composers into the membership? And we said, absolutely. That's crazy. We should totally do it, right? So they agreed, and they just kind of want to get the confirmation. So they put that together, and that's why there's now composer and publisher. It's now a composer and publishing entity, right? It's more of a production music entity instead of just a publisher or just a composer featured thing. So I've always been into advocacy, and I had seen Eddie around at these events, and we always see each other on Facebook, chiming in when people had questions about stuff. And I was like, that guy's spot on. I'd like his stuff. Or he would see some of my posts and like those. And then we just kind of started hanging out a little bit. And all this kind of came together at the last Production Music Conference. So one of the things we like to do is, or actually, I'll say this just to continue. And, the one thing that I really appreciate about the whole music for media space, and in particular in production music, is that it's definitely a community. I don't really find that as much in like the record side of things or the traditional publisher side of things. But I do see a lot of support and a lot of engagement with people and a lot of back and forth and people helping each other out. And I've helped launch a lot of composers early careers, when they were having a hard time figuring out where to go. I helped people out with that. So all this kind of came to a logical conclusion. Since we're kind of doing all this anyway, why don't we just, form a trio to see what we can do to help people out and also kind of build more community. So that's my story, and I'm stuck with it.
Yeah. We love you, Timothy.
Thank you,
Anyway,
man.
there's a few things that came up here. First of all, I want to touch on collaboration, and you guys seem like, again, you're a little bit of a powerhouse because everyone has a different superpower. And what hard lessons did you all have to learn in order to come together right now? Because Eddie, you started touching on how you got burnt being in a band, which I feel like can leave a mark and say, well, fuck it, I don't want to I don't want to work with anyone now. But I feel like you took it to the next level and got together with the people who you just understood who you had to get together with. What were kind of hard lessons again that you had to learn along your journeys in order to get together now and do your thing?
Well, I
I
mean,
mean,
for me, it's
I'll
like,
speak.
oh,
Let's
what's
start.
that?
Let's
Go
start
ahead, Ed.
with Tim. Let's start with do
Yeah, yeah.
Tim, Timothy, Ed.
I think the one of the most important things that we have is, you know, all of us have been through it, and we're three walking examples of resilience. The ability to overcome when things don't go your way, knowing where you fall in the food chain in the production world. Production music is a piece of production, it's not everything. But having to deal with clients and how you interface with them, and then the hard lessons that you get when things don't go your way. And the thing, I mean, I've sold 46 main titles that made it to air. Think how many I wrote on, so there is a level that you have to be resilient and have faith in your ability, but also an ability to also learn those lessons, but be able to onboard them without it destroying your ability to move on and take on the next gig and be positive about it. That is, I think, that is the lesson I think a lot of people don't want to hear, but the truth is you need to keep plowing through, and things aren't always going to go your way. But I always think that the experience we have to tell them, like, this is something that can happen. It's not the end of the world. It's just Tuesday. So that is one of the things that we bring, I think, is that our shells have been hardened a bit. But it's also, an example of, like, but we're still here. We're still at it. All of us are probably close to 30 years in this racket. I mean, he's 20 plus for me and more. I don't want to count at this point. I don't really want to count anymore. So I think that's the one thing, the level that we have is that to know where, yes, there are pitfalls and what are the ones to avoid, and also know that sometimes they can't be avoided, and that's part of the process as well.
Ed.
Ed?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I was just talking to somebody and said almost the exact same thing that you just said. I mean, it's not even that I got burned by bands, but it was more about that, when you produce a band, it's not really about you, it's about them. It's their record with their name on it. It's their art. You're just there to make it the best it can be. So when you're composing, now it's your art and it's your band and it's your thing. So you can really put whatever you want into it. You're like controlling your own destiny a lot more. And I've always said with production music, like, really, like, there's like opportunities just like flying around in the air that you just have to grab, because you can decide, hey, tonight I'm going to stay up until 4 o'clock in the morning and I'm going to write 5 songs, and I'm going to produce those songs, and I'm going to get them out there, and I'm going to work my ass off, and I'm going to turn that into money. I'm going to turn that into success. I'm going to turn that in. Whereas producing records, you don't really have that because it's not your art. So it's like, I've always felt comfortable about like living and dying on my own talent, and you have to be able to take rejection. I mean, it's like, I always feel like if you have to bring a lawyer into your creative space, you're like, if you have to sit with somebody and explain to a library why they need your track and make a case for yourself, then you miss the point already. Like, you need to be able to move on quickly. If I deal with a client and they're like, I don't like the drum beat, I'll be like, okay, I'll change it. I'll send you back another one. It's not like, well, why don't you like it? You should like it because I heard another song yesterday that had the same. Nobody cares. It's like, it's like if I really feel strongly about something, I'll tell the library owner, are you sure you want me to rewrite that top line? Like, you sure? And if they're like, yeah, we're sure. Okay, fine. Move on. But sometimes people will be like, well, let me think about it for a day. And the next day, they'll come back to me and say, you know something, I listened to it and I love it. Or, nah, I still don't like it, so rewrite it. But it's like, it's all about just rolling and pivoting. I mean, people have no idea how many times I've pivoted in my career, and all the different things I do. I still work with bands. I still mix records. I do radio jingles. I mean, I do so many different things in the music space that if I was just one niche guy, I don't know what I'd be doing now if my whole thing was I do hip hop and that's it. I mean, I don't know what I'd be doing. I'd be doing hip hop part time. So you have to be used to hearing that something isn't right, or somebody doesn't like your track, and you have to, you learn from that experience, but you also have to believe in yourself, because it's like anything else. I had a track turned down by a major company at the last minute, and literally that track made me like 20 grand in 1 month on with a different company. So obviously it wasn't like there was something wrong with it, it just wasn't right for them. So you just have to learn how to move on, not to take things personally, just or personal, and just move on and keep plugging away, and just do your best. Like, you could tell me a record that I produced and you could tell me that you think it's the worst record in the world, and I'll tell you that I stand by it, whether you like it or not. Doesn't matter to me, because I believe in it. I believed in it then, I believe in it now. And I think that's what it's called. Like, one record executive used to say, like, "Will you take a bullet?" Like, I'd bring a band into shop, and he'd say to me straight out, "Would you take a bullet for that band?" And if you say no, he'd be like, "Well, then why are you here?" So you have to be prepared to say, "Yeah, I'll take a bullet for that." And if he says, "Well, it sucks," well, then fine, that's cool. I'll see you later. But a lot of people in this business are so eager to please other people, they won't take a bullet for something because they're afraid that if somebody says that it sucks, now all of a sudden, like, you're gonna crawl up into a hole and die. It's like, you have to be able to say, like, well, cool, if you don't like it, that's cool, somebody else will. Like, I'll move on, or I'll just write something else.
Yeah. Identity is a big thing. Identity is a huge thing, and ego is a big thing as well. And that's, I don't care where you are in the industry. I feel like, yeah, ego is something that I've had to dial down in order to even start seeing any success in anything, basically. And yeah, I feel like that's a perfect transition into mentoring, where I feel like I'm a person who checks himself constantly, maybe too much, like a little bit too self critic. But I see people who are um, turning up and going like, "You want to see how I made 5 grand out of how you can make 5 grand tomorrow out of an ad. This is how I did it," kind of thing, where it's like, how do you market something really really unsexy like sync, you know what I mean? um
Well, it's
and that's a question I got to you, like, how do you even approach mentorship? Like, the student needs to be so ready to approach somebody like you, or even somebody like me, to drag them to where I'm at. It needs a different mindset, the way that I see it. What's your approach to it, and how do you react to the things that you see of people who aren't necessarily qualified to give information?
Well, I think sync has actually become something very sexy. I remember when I was growing up, when you went and bought a guitar, the box would have like some guy with long hair like this on the front of it. Like, like, like perfect for stage. Now it's like you buy a keyboard at Guitar Center and it says perfect for film and television on the side of it. Like, I think at some point people realize that, like, to be a rock star, like, you needed to have, especially when I came up in bands, you needed to have a certain look. You had to be able to play. You had to be able to like be on stage. You had to be able to go on tour. All these qualifications for sync. Like nowadays, people get away with just having a laptop. They don't even have a keyboard with it. They're playing the keys on the laptop. Like, the entrance for sync is so much different. Like, you don't it's not, the ageism isn't quite the same. Like, when I was coming up, in the 90s and the early 2000s, like, nobody had like a 60-year-old guy in their band. It just wasn't like that, unless you were the Stones. Like, it wasn't like that. You'd have a band full of 20-year-olds and then some 60-year-old guy. So there was so many factors that, like, now sync is like, I think that's why it became such a code word, because people are like, "Oh, it's going to be easy. I can just waltz in there and write the trailer for the Transformers." They don't realize that there's like a whole business going on around
Right.
sync, and that it's not just like,
Yeah.
"Oh, I'm going to take over this business." And I think a lot of people nowadays don't want to put in the time. So instead of putting in the time, they just decide to call themselves experts, because you can do that instantly. Yeah, I could be an expert in open heart surgery tomorrow if I say I am nowadays. I just go on the internet and say, "Hey, I'm an expert in heart surgery, buy my video." And people actually believe you nowadays. They don't even look at you. They don't even look at your credits. They don't look at what you do. They just, he said he's an open heart surgery expert, so I'll just believe him. And sync is fairly uncredited. Unless you're really in sync and you know where to look, people get away with all kinds of stuff. People with 5 placements are like experts. It's like,
Right.
cool. I guess you can learn
Yeah,
from everyone, but
yeah.
I'd
I mean,
rather
you
learn
could.
from somebody who has 10,000.
Yeah, I mean, they might be experts in how in the beginning part of the career, how to drive
Right.
that, but as far as sustaining it, and we're talking earlier about resilience and all those kind of things and disappointments. People always like, "What was your first big break?" And I was like, "When I got the extra theme," and they're like, "Oh," and I said, "And my second big break was when I lost the extra theme. It was a different kind of break," you know. Um, and so yeah, I think the one thing is I do think that sync is definitely sexier. I think there's a lot these days at least, because I think a lot of people are waking up to the fact that to put your stuff up on streaming platforms is unless you're getting into the billions of streams or millions of streams, you're really not making any kind of sustainable living. It's very difficult, right? And so sync is one of those areas where I think you can still monetize things fairly well, and so I think that's very attractive. Plus, I years ago I had a guy tell me, he goes, "One day everything's going to come down the same pipe, man, you'll see." And I was like, "I don't know, but it's true. Like, everything comes kind of through the phone now. Music comes through there, people watch videos on there, and so everything is merging. So I think that's also why sync is developing as a bigger thing. Is that it's transforming the business a bit. And it's also great promotion, right? You get a song in a film that's a big film, or you get a song in a big TV show. Your band can break up, but that song is still playing. Whoever wrote it and whoever holds the publishing is going to make a check every time that thing plays. So people like the longevity of it. There's shows from the '50s that are still playing that composers who wrote that music are dead, but their estates are still bringing in royalties. Like I Love Lucy, stuff like that.
Yeah, I
I think
love the
it's
Absolutely.
interesting.
story. Oh, sorry. Sorry, go ahead.
I think it's interesting. I do think, yeah, there is a there the get. My friend Joel Goodman has a good phrase for it. He says it's a get rich slow scheme. That's really true, especially I said
Yes.
that's really on the money. Like, yes, you will have, if you're lucky, and we three have been lucky with a lot of effort in there, but we've had these big I had the late show with Craig Ferguson theme for 10 years. That was a lucky break, right? But I said for 10 years. Those 10 years are behind me now. So how do you sustain it? There you'll have these ups and downs, but it is the if you think you're going to come in and have the cue that's going to change your life, you might, but even that cue will probably start to wear out, and you'll have to have a more sustainable pattern. And how do you build out a long-term career through whether it's volume of cues, like places you have music and how you create it, and how do you monetize those and get them to the places where they're most successful. That is just a process, and it is a get rich slow scheme. You slowly build, you start to learn the inside workings of the, first of all, how the music works, how to make the actual music work. So you figure out how a cue can be successful, even just structurally. Those kind of
Yes.
real bare bones things that's really, that is it's a learned skill. It's like how people know songs go verse, chorus, verse, chorus. Production music has its own structural elements as well that need to, because you're serving a different master than you would be if you're writing a pop song. Even if you're selling a pop song to a production music library, it is a slightly different version. So all of that makes me say, like, there is a sustainable life in this work. But if you don't have the right building blocks of how to even create the music, even if you're the greatest writer in the world, if you do not give it in a formatting and style that they're looking for, it will land in a dustbin or just gather dust on someone else's hard drive. So there's all of those skill level things that we have, and yes, you will have. There is the $5,000 placement out there. Sure, we still get them ourselves every now and again. And we still go, woo, yay! I mean, wins are great. I love wins, but you can't hit home runs all the time. You need to learn how to hit singles. And that's how guys who can hit singles stay in the league a lot longer than guys who depend on hitting home runs all the time. If you can hit home runs and that's how you do it, good on you. But I found a few home runs are great, but the singles are you need to have going all the time. That's my baseball analogy for the day.
Go Dodgers.
Go Dodgers.
100%. And I feel like that's just it goes through your theme, pun intended. When you made your first theme, maybe that theme that lasted 10 years, it was one of maybe, I would guess, a few hundreds that you've made and didn't make it, at least.
At
And
least.
that's what
At least.
people don't see. Like, that's what people don't see when they see Kobe Bryant, rest in peace, sinking, or Steph Curry sinking in 80 points. They don't see the 800 they put in every day.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's the whole, my analogy to it is like, I, people see the front. That's why I've done it for a few weeks where if I don't post, I just delete social medias from off my phone, because it tends to really show me one side of things, and then my brain gets tricked into thinking that things are easy. I don't know if that makes sense.
Neil
But
totally.
No.
with the
There's
way
no simple
technology,
answer to. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, with the way
There's no simple
technology
answer to that
works,
stuff. Yeah.
yeah.
I think people think since we have the machines that can allow us to create music theoretically easier, then the end result should be easier too. I have the machine. I have some skill. Why isn't the reward the same as simple as firing up Logic Pro?
Yeah,
But
and
it's
that's because there's more people can do it now, right? So that there's the
right.
space is
Mhm.
much more crowded. So that's one of the things that we've learned is how to kind of navigate and cut through that crowd a bit. Just from doing it all the
Yeah.
time, but also all the little things that are going to make the editor. The first thing an editor sees, they don't hear your music. They look in source audio, whatever they're using, and they're seeing waveforms and they're seeing titles. That's the first thing. So that's the first. When we talk about edit points, we talk about having certain types of endings, how to begin a cue, all that stuff. Um, Titles. People.
Envisioning where your music would work. Have you done enough research to see where you could put your music? And have you listened to what those kind of shows are like? And have you done just the basic research you would expect someone to do entering a business? If you haven't, you need to start. You need to target how you think your music could be possibly used and then hone in on those places. We hear it all the time. I don't watch Beverly Hills of Housewives. I'm like, well, tough shit. If you want to be on those shows, you better start realizing how do you think you're going to enter a marketplace and have done no market research? Find out where
Yeah.
you can be, find your home, and then try to build from that. Find the thing that makes you unique, find where it fits. It fits somewhere, odds are. And then you have a place, then you have a launching off point, maybe. But to
Yeah.
think you're going to be all things to all people and it's just going to drop in but I don't watch those kind of shows is really not a really productive way to look at it. You are part of a production. You're not the whole thing. There could be a bit of ego involved in being a musician. Like, well, I just do the music bit. Okay, well, great. But when you give that music bit to an editor and it doesn't work for his job, he's not going to spend the time to make it work because he's got a post supervisor on his back saying, "Where's my cut?" So you have to know how the food chain works and where you fall in it. And that's
Yeah.
the kind of stuff we've learned, all three of us, different paradigms, whether it's advertising or main titles or the rigor it takes to get through that production process. We've all been through it hundreds of times and had great success and had our asses handed to us. It's just part
Yeah.
of it.
I mean, they're people, I've worked with directors on commercials. They'll give me a 15-second spot and say, I have three distinct emotions in this 15-second spot, and I need you to hit all three of them. And you're like, in 15 seconds, you want me to hit three emotions? But yeah, you need to figure that out. There's so much stuff. I mean,
And
I have a television on in my studio 24 hours a day. There's always a television on in my studio. I'm switching around channels. I'll unmute it, listen to some music, listen to what's going on. I mean, for the most part, as a musician for production music, you want your music to be invisible. You want your music to add a mood without realizing it's on. You don't want people to be focusing on your song. You want them to focus on the story, unless you're writing like the theme of the show. But for the most part, if you're writing cues, especially, scoring documentaries, the last thing you want is people to be like, wow, that's a cool beat. Like, that's not what it's about. It's about the story. You're just there to enhance the story, and like what Tim was saying too, people don't realize like how important that waveform is and how it looks. Because these people are not just they're not listening to your music unless they know who you are. They're just scrolling through waveforms. And you got to remember that editors, like, to move their finger from like here to there is a lot of work, right? So if they can keep a song, if they have 5 minutes to fill in a scene, if they can keep your song on for 5 minutes, they will. So if your peaks and valleys are interesting enough that they'll leave it on, they will. They won't switch it. The reason why they switch it is because they need a different mood or something else, and your track's not giving that. So a lot of people, like, there's so many basic like 101 things, when I talk to new composers, that they don't understand. They really don't get it. And it's like I've always said, like, you can't be afraid of modifying your music and taking advice and taking criticism. Like, I've seen so many artists like love every one of their songs so much that they hold on to it so tight that they smother it and strangle it and it dies. And there's so much art, and then there's craft to writing production music. You want the art, but you need to hit the craft part of it. You need the part of it, the I don't want to say the numbers game, but you need the points. You need to hit those, like Tim said, like, just try writing a song that's all verses and no chorus. People will be like, "Where's the hook?" You need to know that you need a chorus at some point. Well, it's the same thing with production music. It's just not as obvious because you're not sitting around listening to it on Spotify or on the radio usually.
it's also, look, there is a numbers game. Like I said, I mean, there's a little bit music by the pound, but what Eddie was saying is right. How do you get paid on production music? You get paid by the second, not by the cue. So the longer they use your cue, the more money you're making. So the object of the game is to, one, get them to use it and then make it as usable for as long as possible, and then you make more money. Then the best is when you do all this work on the back end of a queue and it actually gets used. Does it get used all the time? Rarely, but you want to build it so they might. So those are the little things that, like, look, you're going second by second, the usages and all those things. That's where you find the money. That's how you monetize it. You have to have length of queues, position in a show. All of that stuff is really important. And you have to put yourself in the context of saying, how can this queue best be monetized? And first off is to make it usable as long as possible. That's step one. So that's those are just things that you have to be, you see it. I mean, if you really grind, once you start seeing your stuff getting used, you're sort of like, why did that one make it? There's always stuff to be learned from even your failures. And why did the one I love so much not? Sometimes just that's the way it is, and you have no idea why. And then sometimes, like, you go and listen to it, like, I can see why this worked, because if it's, especially if you do something like a tune set and you can hear where it's placed, even if you don't see it, you can hear the voiceover on top. You're like, ah, okay, I see why that works. And you can then you go then you that's real actionable information, you know. But first you got to get it on. First you got to get in shows, and then you can worry about how they're being used, you know. And that is a big jump as well. Just making it in is a victory, you know.
Hmm. And I think too, like, a lot of people, um, I've had people with the first production music library I had, it was called Move Music, who I signed, and then they sent over like two cues, and they're like, we finishing this album? What are we doing? And they're like, well, I just thought I'd put these two and see how it goes. I'm like, well, it's not going to go anywhere necessarily, right? Like, it is a numbers game for sure. Not to over kind of emphasize that point, but also I talked to a guy the other day that it's not just the creative side, but also the business side. Like, he had spoken to someone, that he took a course or something online, and they're like, you should be getting $20,000 placements, when you get into a reality show. And I'm like, that's ludicrous. That's absolutely ludicrous. And he goes, yeah, we had an offer for a song to be licensed, and they only wanted to give us 3,000. He goes, this is about 5 years ago. And I said, well, so you were going to still own the track. You were just licensing the track. He goes, uh-huh. So I said, and you didn't want to take the 3,000, whatever it was. It was no, because this guy told me it should be a lot more. And I said, okay, so what has that track done for you now that you kind of held that integrity of whatever false information you got, right? Um, and he's just like, yeah, it's just kind of sitting here on the drive. I haven't been able to place it since. And I was like, well, you could have had $3,000 in your pocket, gotten into the game a little sooner, and also, you know, maybe it could have got used more. Who knows? So it's all those
And
things, right?
gotten
It's
a
the
win
creative
for the
side.
music and yeah, gotten a win for the music supervisor, gotten it in,
Hmm.
created that relationship, building that. Maybe that's like, oh, that guy so he licensed me one and he did me a solid. I'm gonna go back to him and look for another one. Those relationships, you can't not buy that kind of relationship. A chance to make a relationship and let another guy win using your work is that's gold. That's
Oh yeah.
gold. That could let
I mean,
you have no idea where that's going to take you. I know where it's not going to take you now, though. If you don't do it, you get nothing. They'll never come back to you. They won't.
I
Because
don't really talk
anon,
about it. But what's that? I'm sorry. I thought you
yeah.
were.
Go
No,
ahead,
hit
Ed.
it.
Go ahead, Ed.
No, I mean, I don't really talk about. But when I was 19, I got an opportunity. It's a long story, but I got an opportunity to get a song as a filler song in a major motion picture that ended up the soundtrack went like 10 times platinum. But I didn't know that at the time. But I got an opportunity, and they wanted me to give the song for free. Okay, and this is like when I was 19. And I was like, free? And my lawyer's, ah, don't do it. What are you kidding? Ah. I didn't do it. And the soundtrack went like 10 platinum, and I would have been on the soundtrack. And I didn't do it. And the person who pitched me the idea told me I was making a huge mistake. And it was one thing that, when I started shopping bands and I'd sit with a band in front of a lawyer, and the lawyer would be like, well, I wouldn't do this if they won't do this on the deal. And I'm like, well, you're still going to make like $2,000 an hour as a lawyer, but these kids are going to work in a gas station if they don't sign this record deal. So you sure you don't want to sign this? I've always said when it comes to advice, like it's good to listen to people and to take advice, but you have to make the decision that works for you at the end of the day. And when people tell you, oh, you could get a 30 grand, well, that's easy to say. You could play me any track and I could tell you, oh, you could get 100 grand for that, but you've been offered 2 grand and you're still going to retain your ownership. Like, what's the problem? But that's an ego thing. It's an ego thing, and it's from people taking the wrong advice, and then you realize that the person that you took advice from isn't even in this business, which is even funnier.
I mean, I think that is one of the reasons we started Evil Genius. We hear these stories, we see advice given on Facebook groups, and we all just roll our eyes. And we were like, or digitally roll our eyes, like, what is this nonsense? Then at a certain point, you're like, I'm not going to correct every person who's giving bad advice or being kind of hoity-toity and thinking they know something that they don't, especially when they speak incorrectly. We sort of like, this is insane because there's too much bad advice intel going out there, and we hear it all the time. And we were just like, that is not true. That is not workable. That's not what I've found on the ground 20 plus years in. And we all say the
Yeah.
same thing, like, we've been on the ground a long time. And a lot of things people are saying and are selling that they're saying are, we have not found to be true. Maybe in
Or
a
credible.
vacuum, yes, you should get 20,000. Oh, sure, that's great. But we don't live in a vacuum. You live in a marketplace, and the market will not bear those costs usually. So that is the difference that we have with, I think, what we see from a lot of the advice or mentorship we're giving is, look, in a perfect world, maybe what they're saying is true, but we live in the imperfect world of making a living as a composer, and it's a much more gray, imperfect life than people want to know. There's no set answer to every monetary thing, and but I guarantee you this: if you start saying no to stuff before you've even put your foot in the door, you're not going to get asked much ever again. It'll end very quickly for you.
Big. This is big. I've just had an artist here a few days back. I was mixing her track, and she was like, "Do you know what, when you get stuck on a track and it's like it just gets stuck?" And I'm like, "No, I make 200 tracks a year. It doesn't occur to me because I just go on to the next one, and if the last track was shitty, it's just like today's another day kind of thing, and that's the great thing about production music. Another thing that you've touched on that I'd like to expand on is I feel like people are overlooking the fact that when you write for a library, when you write for a company, just like Ed said, when they ask for different drums, you don't argue with that. First of all, because sometimes it'll take them a few days to answer back, but another thing is it's just the way it is. You just keep on moving and learning and expanding your knowledge. And that's the beauty of this. You get to learn for free and then actually earn from it back end. So I feel like I love where y'all are coming from because I still have entitlement issues for sure. Like my all my listeners know about it and I know about it, and it's just a thing that exists, that I feel like communities like yours can really help people maybe get out of that and get into a mode where it's okay to split 50-50 if somebody just laid a trumpet on your track. It's okay to do all these things because when everybody wins, in the end of the day, it's better business for everybody. Does that make sense?
I think, yeah, I think it's interesting because the three of us deal directly with the creatives. We've been at that level. Those people are not musicians. So someone is saying, giving you musical references that they don't speak music. So your job really is to be able to take layman terms and turn it into musical ideas where you're acting upon the creative they're giving back, whether it's revisions or anything. That's the gig. If you're writing for PMLs, most of the people that are giving you notes are musicians, and so you should listen unequivocally. We listen either way. We do as told, but we have to do a bunch of math and interpretation. This is why you see, if you look at Eddie and Tim and Timothy and me, we have a lot of the people we work with over and over again because once you develop that language, they come back to you over and over again because you get to know their shorthand. When they're saying they're not hearing this, you know what that means, even though it's not a musical term. All of those things are really important. But especially if you're coming up and you're going through the production music world, the producers on the production music, the 9 times out of 10 or 9.5 times out of 10 are musicians or composers or producers for in the straight in music world. When you get to dealing directly interfacing with production companies, you're dealing with people who are in job. If I'm a line producer, I do budgets. If I'm an exec producer, I'm dealing with talent. But you still have to interpret their creative in a musical way that gets them the product that they want. If you don't, they will find someone else very quickly. So that is the thing. Revisions are the gig. It's like I always say, writer's block is for amateurs, and revisions are the job. The fun
Yeah.
part is when you come up with something creative, but the revisions part, that's the work. You do the revisions. It's as long as it takes.
And a lot of
As
times,
long as
yeah, exactly. As long as it takes, and as a lot of times when creatives or people, not creatives, but executives or whoever you're dealing with, right, are saying, "Hey, can you swap out the drums?" Because some of them are not musicians, right? A lot of times, it it's not even a musical request. A lot of times it's because, and you have no idea why they want to swap out the drums, and you're thinking,
Right.
those, I spent so much time working on those drums. The snare is just popping. It's great. It's like, it's too much, right? And it's like, replace the drums with something else, right? So, and then you realize when you finally see it, they're like, oh, there's a lot of Foley and sound design happening during this time, and my drum track probably would have interfered with that, right? There's a lot. It's not just all about your track and your creativity and what's better or not for anything. It's how it's going to fit in that scene. So if they're asking you for revisions or to swap out drums or whatever it is, it's usually based on, it's not, we think that the temperature of this track would work well with what we have on screen, but the drums are doing something, and maybe they can't even explain why or don't want to explain why, but
Yeah.
usually that's the reason. It's usually interfering with something in the scene, or it's distracting from the dialogue or something, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes you get something that don't make any sense at all, like, and to speak to that, like in my last company, we have stems with all our tracks, right? And like it used to freak me out. I think we've licensed like 90 different bass stems, just bass stems. I'm like, okay, that's what you want, that's cool, that works that way too, right? So sometimes it's the same amount as if it was a full orchestral track. So
Yeah.
there you
Exactly.
go.
It pays the same.
It's about
Pays the
it's
same.
about knowing your audience. It's about knowing your audience, whether your audience is an executive at Paramount or your audience is a television. You need to know your audience, know who you're talking to, and you have to learn how to interpret. There are times that, advertising people are telling me to switch to drums. They're really telling me to turn down the drums. They're not actually even telling me to switch them. And you have to try to get to the bottom without acting like you're being passive aggressive. Sometimes you have to actually really get to the bottom of what the problem is. Like I remember I did a thing for NFL Today. I did and they told me they just wanted bass and drums. And they ran this track on NFL Today for like literally 5 years, 6 years. They played for 5 minutes under while they were talking the whole time. And what's really funny is they told me we just want bass and drums. We just want bass and drums, no other instruments. I gave him bass and drums. The first time I listened to it on TV, and all you heard was the hi-hat in the track because they had it so low. You heard your tick, 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 tick. And then the guy said to me, oh, okay, so next week we're going to make a revision. Like they're literally making revisions by watching the thing on TV. That after the first week, they made a revision for the second week. Okay. And they said, we got to get rid of that thing that's going boom, 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 boom. I'm like, well, that's the bass. And they're like, no, no, it's not. I was like, well, yeah, it is. It's the bass because there's only bass and drums, and the thing you're humming to me is the bass. They're like, oh, okay, well then maybe that's not the problem. What's that other thing that's going tick 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 tick? I was like, that's the hi hat. And they're like, yeah, the hi hat. Okay, that's not working because that's all I hear in the TV. And I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
so you want me to get rid of the hi hat? So it's going to be bass, like kick drum and snare. They're like, I don't know, whatever. And I realized from watching it on TV myself, they just wanted me to turn down the hi-hat about 15 dB. So when they buried the track, you could actually hear the kick drum and the bass, which if they had, the hi-hat was way too loud for the dialogue. So you couldn't hear anything else except the ticking. And it's like, not to say too much, but like when I score documentaries, I would reference my mix with the dialogue. I put my mix 20 dBs down. And now what can I hear? Can I hear that cool piano pad I did? Can I hear it? No, I can't even hear that anymore.
Nope.
So I mix my track with the dialogue with my track 20 dBs down, get it the way I like it. You might turn it up and go, wow, that sounds weird. Like the bass is overpowering and the piano, but I know it's going to be 20 dBs down when I see it on TV. And that kind of thing. I didn't just learn, I didn't watch somebody's YouTube video and learn that. I learned it by scoring documentaries and realizing what I had to do to make my music sound right on TV. Because the first documentary I scored for Discovery Plus did not sound right when it got on TV. And it's like, okay, I got to fix this. So those are the kind of things you figure those things out, while you're actually doing this, not by watching a YouTube video on techniques of writing cue music. Because a lot of those people making those videos are in their mid 20s. I mean, I don't know how many years they have making cue music unless they started when they were 5.
Hmm. It's funny because I have a funny story about that. I had a music supervisor at Warner Brothers that I would get a track done and I'd email it over to him, and and if I didn't hear anything, I was like, okay, good sign, right? And then all of a sudden, I'd look down, my phone would ring, and I'd see his name pop up. I was like, oh shit, And the first thing I'd do, I'd answer it, and I'd have it on speaker, and there would be no hello or anything. I'd just hear my track being played back to me for about 15 seconds, and coming through the little phone speaker, right? And he'd go, and then he'd come on, he'd come on the phone and go, "What did you hear the most of?" I'm like, "My hi hat or the strings or something." He's like, "Yeah, pop those down a little bit." Right? He was really in tune with what would work with dialogue and all that kind of thing. So as soon as he heard a mix, he kind of knew, and he would pop it back to the phone because the phone has limited bandwidth as far as the speakers usually, right? So you're going to hear the things that are really pronounced in the mix coming through. That was his little trick, but it was really kind of a funny thing. So yeah, it's
See
all
that
that.
here's a good one. This one's for free. Tim Edwards hack. If you're scoring, if you're looking for cues, grab some dialogue from YouTube, play it on top of your cue to see if it's actually going to fit. Any dialogue, any clean dialogue without voice, without music under, pull it and stick it on top of your cue. If you're worried if it's going to cut through the dialogue, there's your answer.
And sometimes
That's
I
his
just take the
hack.
sound off my TV. It's funny that you said that because I'll take the mute off my TV and I'll watch the news and they're just talking and
Yeah,
I'll play my music underneath the news
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yep.
yeah.
decide whether it's conflicting or not.
And and I often say, listen on the speakers that most people listen on when you're doing your mixes.
Hmm.
What does this
I
sound
used to
like
have,
on your computer speakers and things like that? Where is the actual how are you interfacing this music? Where is it actually going to be heard? You listen on great speakers. Well, most people don't watch TV on big TVs anymore. They're watching it on their laptop or whatever the fuck, even on their phone or whatever. It's got to work on all those things. But number one, it's got to work on the shittiest ones first. So, I mean, those are just some little hacks that I've learned. Tim's is a good
Mm-hmm.
hack too. I like that one.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes I'll even, like, if it's a tension cue, I'll even do my own voiceover just to kind of listen to myself, like, Bobby was hitchhiking and down the street, and
Yeah.
when he was approached, and
Oh,
it was the last
I
time
do
his
the
family ever
visual
saw him
picture
again.
too.
Yeah.
I do the visual picture. I like I'm trying to imagine. Okay, she's getting out of the car, and then she's kind of sexy, and she walks into the restaurant, and I'm like doing this whole thing. Like that usually takes about this long. I'm actually kind of thinking of time wise. I put myself in there. I mean,
oh
anything
yeah,
to make the cue work.
yep,
Anything.
I do that
Because you're
too.
working backwards. You're like you don't have the picture, so you have to like make some kind of version of the picture in your brain to at least somehow give you some context, maybe, And I found that those end up because once I start doing them, I'm like, okay, yeah. And then when I start getting real busy with composing a lot, I'm like, watch those
Yeah,
scenes.
especially
There's nothing happening, Stop, you know.
especially with tension cues. You gotta like tension cues always be like, okay, this is where the detective walks into the room and he sees a little blood on the floor. Okay, then there's the discovery process, and then he decides to go into the bedroom, and then he sees the dead body there. Now that's a different vibe, right? Then he sees the person run outside the window, and he chases after him. That's the next step. So if you have all those steps in your in your tension cue, if they don't use it for the whole thing, at least you hit one of the spots. You got one of them
Yep.
somewhere. You got either the chase or the discovery or the realization. You got all those spots. And that's what when people say, "Oh, I don't watch TV." It's like, well, then you're missing out on everything. It's like somebody saying like, "Oh, I'm in a metal band, but I don't listen to metal." It's like, "Oh, cool. Okay, that's
Right.
interesting. That's cool."
Yeah. When I used to
See
write
that?
a lot of music for the Kardashians years ago, and not only did I watch the show religiously, and people were like, "Oh, I hate that show." I'm like, "Yeah, but you know what it is." Um, I actually went over and met with the editors at one point too. Because I got to know the music supervisor pretty well, and he made an introduction, right? And so and I found that, like, they were there cutting, like, 10, 11, 12 hours a day. And, I was like, God, that's another thing. It made me realize, don't make people work harder than they have to. Right. So, like, that's when I started offering stems,
Ease
and
of
that's when I
use.
started
Ease
ease
of
of use,
use.
all that stuff. Right. Because those guys have families. They just want to get home. They have, a producer for the segment who's going to approve it. And then it's going to go to possibly a supervising producer over that, and he just wants to kind of make sure that it's as good as it can be, obviously, right? And do a good job, but he also wants to get it approved, right? And so how can I make that process a little easier? And so that's when I started kind of making sure I had stems or alternate mixes or things like that, making it available, not giving them too much where it's like crazy choices, but just enough to go, oh, you know what? I like this cue, but I wish there was no drums in it. Here's the stems. You can do whatever you want. Right. And the other thing I'll say too about the ego side, since we were talking about that earlier, there's a lot of people are like, well, my music is, that's how I wrote it. That's the intention. Right. You got to kind of lose that for sure. And not saying that you are just there to be like cranking out like a jukebox or something, but um, it's the thing is this: I send out briefs for shows to our composers, and they'll all get the exact same brief. But what I get back, if I get 10 composers and I give all 10 composers the same brief, I'm going to get 10 very different tracks. They all sound like they could be on the same album, that they could live together, but they're all different, right? And that's because everything comes through our own filters, depending on what you grew up listening to, what your influences were, your approach to how you make music. So your stamp is already on it, even if you're making really kind of I don't want to use the term generic because that's not the term at all. But something that's maybe less artistic in your mind or something like that. Your imprint is already on that through the filters that you came up with, right? So your originality is going to be in there either way, right? So it's just a matter of kind of making things work, kind of dropping that ego and just providing what production needs, because the idea is, when you watch a TV show, it's not necessarily just the actors that you watch. There's also the background, the scenery, there's the dialogue, there's the script, and there's the music. It should all be one holistic thing that's coming at you as a thing that you're not picking one thing out over another. It all needs to work together like a machine with gears, right? So one gear is going to be off, it's going to throw off the entire rest of the machine. So yeah.
I mean, one of the we were talking before, the three of us were talking about these kind of conversations are the things that we were having and going down these rabbit holes, and we were like, we should do like we should talk shop, like a organized. We're actually going to call it talking shop, where you can get on. We'll just talk about this stuff, and then obviously we can get more individualized and all down the line. But I think we found that each other just doing this over a beer or two, we would it exposed so many things that we would, well, we could be doing this a lot. There's a lot of information that we both, maybe all three of us, have that we maybe hadn't even thought we could tap into. But with very little prompting, as you've seen, we can go off on this stuff for hours, because one thing experience gives you is just that experience. We've had so many layers of experience in different parts of the business and how they interconnect. And then, the odd horror story. I mean, everyone likes a good war story. I mean, those are always fun too. So those are one of the things we were going to talk about too. It's just have maybe a thing we call talking shop, and we're just going to set up and people can ask us questions, and kind of something initially to get people to see what we're about and everything, and we'll go from there. But we want to share what we've learned over all these years to people who really want to get into it, but give them stuff that's really actionable, like that's real. It's very easy to get sent down the primrose path on this, and it's your intellectual property that you have to create, and that's always going to be your part. But we've been on all sides. We've produced, we've written, we've sold, we've lost gigs, we've gotten gigs, we've made bunches of money sometimes, other times it's been tougher. It's all part of the gig. And I think that's the value of the three of us when we sit around and bat these ideas against each other is pretty unique. And I think that's why we came together. Really, it's like there's something to offer here, and didn't want people necessarily being sold a bill of goods about how the realities of the business, And I thought that needed to stop to a certain degree. I think we were feeling a little bit of that. So that was one of the, like, as we're talking shop here, that's one of the things we were going to do is talk shop, have an actual thing where we
Yeah.
talk
Yeah,
shop.
we're thinking of doing like maybe like on Tuesdays we'll do like a talk shop, maybe once a month, maybe twice, where anyone in the Facebook group can join in and we can all just sit around and drink coffee, or we can ask questions, or we can do whatever. And part of it is again just to build the community up. And we have a lot of like high level pros in that group that we've invited in. and maybe in the future we'll also have people come in and guest and things like that, on those. But we want to roll it out. It's we started it off just the end of last month, just a Facebook group, and we're just going to kind of build it, because that's part of one of the things I do like about this space in music for media, is that most of us are. I'm very much probably, like you were saying earlier, Roy, like you're more of an individualist, right? And um, so we're all uh, working on our own, usually in our little, studios in a dark room, right? And so it's not really a social gig by any means. And so this is a way to kind of bring that component into it. It's like that feeling when you were like a kid and you got into your first band, you had some camaraderie and it was kind of like a good feeling, right? It's kind of like we want to bring that in, where it feels good to be able to discuss stuff, and you're going to get good answers, and you're going to be able to, make, actionable advice and stuff that you can actually use.
Well, I think
So
also, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I mean,
no, do it.
one of the reasons why Sync is such a community too is because in this world, like I guess people don't realize it at first, but the competition is a little different, because like if I have my track in a library and the editor doesn't pick it, it doesn't get used, they're not going to force themselves to use my track. They're going to move on. So it's like if Tim and I, or either Tim and I, are in the same library, we're not really competing against each other, because if they like my track, they're going to use it. If they don't like my track, they're not going to force themselves to use it. They're going to use his track. So it's not the kind of thing like, oh, the more he's in the same space as me, he's competing against me. Unless we wrote all the same music all the time, we're not competing against each other. It doesn't work that way. So I think that sync works a little different than other aspects of the music business where people feel very competitive against each other. At least for me, it never has. It's never been like, oh, oh, if he gets into this library, now they're gonna have his tracks too. It's not like that. There's so much
Yeah.
production music out there. They don't use your track because you're the only writer they have. It doesn't work that way.
Right. The only time it ever feels kind of that way is when we're like pitching for a main title theme or some big fish kind of thing like that, and there's
Yeah.
300
Then
submissions,
I'll then I'll
and then
kill a motherfucker.
that's right, that's right,
But then a
that's
lot of
right.
times
I'll
people
cut a
don't even
bitch.
realize it.
I'll cut you
I've
for a main
realized this.
title.
I've realized this for me, at least for what I do. There's so many gigs that somebody already has the gig, and then there's a whole bunch of people orbiting around that person trying to provide music in case that person doesn't land the gig. So I've seen the
Yeah.
gigs that I have. When I'll do like a high end gig, it'll come to me directly. And I have no competition. If they don't like what I do, they ask me to do another one. If they don't like that one, they ask me to do another one. They don't go to somebody else. And I've noticed with a lot of like high end gigs where where the rewards are like five figures or six-figure gigs, like if they're really serious about you, they're going to give you money to take a shot. They're going to give you a creation fee, at least from my experience. And all the people around them that aren't getting creation fees or demo fees don't really have a shot. They're trying to steal a gig from somebody. But like I think I've told you this story. I won't make it long, but I did a gig and they were trying to save money by using somebody else, and the network tried to go around me and have somebody else do the gig. And they came back to me a month later and asked me to do the gig. And they when they asked me to do the gig, it was on an
Listen,
email with a thread of all the people that tried to rip off my track. In the thread, they didn't realize that they approved my gig on the thread that they tried to rip me off on. And it was actually sort of funny that I could listen to everybody's track who tried to rip off my track that didn't get the gig. And I could watch their comments like, oh, I don't know where Eddie got this thing from. I don't know what that sound is. Yeah, but it's cool. How do you get it? I don't, and I just watched people on this thread of like 20 in-house composers in the network trying to rip me off. But it was my gig and it became my gig. And, you know, it's really funny how a lot of these things work. Like you realize when you get called for a gig, especially custom gigs, the first thing I ask is how many other people are getting this? And is there a demo fee?
Hmm.
And if they tell me it's a cattle call and there's 200 people doing it, I'm like, well, I'm not doing it. It's like, I'm not doing that. That's ridiculous because somebody else, if there's 200 people going for my gig, somebody's already got that gig and you're just hoping that it goes bad at the last minute and you can try to steal somebody else's gig. So I
yeah,
don't
Very
know.
true.
sometimes,
Very
yeah.
true.
Yeah, I
Very
mean,
Although,
true.
especially
Yeah.
for me, it has been.
Although we landed that Real Housewives theme last December, and it was a cattle call, and we're like, it's a big fish, so let's go for it. And we got it. And
It
there was
was
I
it was
think
a very small it was a very small herd though, I think. I mean, we're in that was two or three, I bet you.
Well, it's not
no, that was
Yeah.
impossible. It's not
it was about
impossible
It's
that you can
three.
land.
possible. I mean, it happens. It happens.
Somebody
Yeah.
lands them. I just feel like if you only have so many hours in a day, for
Oh,
me,
of course,
I
yeah.
spend my
Of
time doing
course.
something
Yeah.
that I know I'm landing. You know what I
Oh
mean?
yeah, yeah, for sure. But yeah,
Yeah, most of my best main titles were layups. You know, most of my biggest stuff was like, "Hey, do this for us." It's very rare that I was. I mean, I have done where I've landed them. Like we just did one where we landed it. But it is true. It speaks to the need to build relationships, and you never know where they're going to go, and why you should take those gigs that were the guy who got me my late night show. Yeah, I did his first theme song for a show on cable. And I did for next to nothing because I wanted to build the relationship. Well, 6 years later, he had the Late Late Show with Craig Ferguson and gave it to me basically.
Yeah,
Basically, not
on
that's the
exactly.
CBS.
way it
Yeah.
works. That's the way it
Yeah,
works. I mean, I did the open for the NFL season last year on CBS. I did the open, okay? And they called me up on Monday and asked me if I was available because it was going to air on Sunday. And I said, yeah. And they said, oh, we'll send you a picture tomorrow. And they didn't. And they didn't send it Wednesday. And they sent it Thursday. I got a picture of the promo on Thursday, and I needed to score it by Sunday. I scored it on all night on Thursday, all day on Friday. There was nobody else with the gig but me. If I didn't score it, guess what? They would have used like a needle drop for the NFL Open. They had nobody else doing it. I even asked. I was like, not too much pressure. I'm the only person doing this, huh? And they're like, yep. So I handed it in Saturday. They asked for one slight revision. Gave them the revision. Sunday it aired. Open for the NFL. My
love
gig. It
shit
was
like
only
that.
my gig. It was a lot of pressure because they really trusted me. If I hadn't landed, I don't know what they would have done. If I gave them something that was unusable, what do they do? I scored at the picture,
Right,
you know?
right. They better
Yeah,
like it.
They better
yeah.
like it. I don't have a choice.
I think that it comes to this whole thing comes down to this whole interview comes down to longevity and relationships. These are the biggest things that I hear about. Of course, in the end of the day, that y'all dropped some crazy gems about listening to music against things, and I wanted to just briefly touch on that because that's what I've learned through reality TV, doing for reality TV, is that versatility of a track can mean so many things. Like having a track be versatile and fitting to a show can position it in such a good place. Plus, having that great waveform, of course, like Eddie said, um, can position it in an amazing place for it to be used again and again and again. And that person who didn't take the 3 grand, that to me is the stupidest thing for me now. Maybe a few years back I wouldn't think that way, but it's the stupidest thing because not only do you get the front end, you're also going to get back end for TV broadcast, and you don't know if that would be the thing that would free you to make music for the next 5 years.
Possibly, yeah.
So
Exactly.
Yeah, but people have nothing to they have nothing to gauge it against. That's what I've noticed because
right,
usually people at our experience don't have enough time to talk to people. So we're just grinding and doing our thing. So you don't really know if 3 grand if you're being insulted or if that's a great deal.
right,
Or if like, oh, I took 3 grand. Oh my God, I could have gotten 25. You don't know. People have nothing to gauge it on. They have no idea. Is three
right,
Which is
grand a good number for that?
exactly right, because that's the thing. That's the number that he heard, or the number he heard from one of these guru guys. Whatever was like 20 grand for this thing,
yeah,
and he got offered three, and he's like, "Oh, we're being ripped off." So it's like it's not necessarily that the person was stupid. He just didn't know. Right, he
Yeah.
had bad information. So that's kind of what we want to do, is give great information, good information, actionable information that you can actually use and go and build a real career with it.
I
You know.
love that. I love that, guys. We're coming on time, and I want to know. I want people who listen to know where they can catch you guys, each individually, and in the evil genius mastermind group. Like, what are the best ways to contact you?
Um, Well, there's a couple ways. Like, so the Evil Genius uh, Sync Composer Masterminds group is on Facebook, right? So you can just search for that. And it's a private group, so we have to invite you in, right? Or not invite you in, but once you kind of go in and want to join it, right, we can bring you in. So that's the main focus, right? There's also like kind of a side Instagram page that I put up for Evil Genius, but that's just, we're going to probably put up funny quotes every week or something like that. But yeah, the Evil Genius thing is definitely the community, right? To join its Facebook, and I know not a lot of people are on Facebook anymore, but we have tons. We use Facebook just because we have tons of connections throughout the years. A lot of pros on there and stuff still, so that's just seemed to be a good hub for it.
And we're accessible on there. Very accessible on there.
Yeah,
Exactly,
we
Yeah.
yeah.
are.
And so for like my personal Instagram, it's just TAE Music, right? So it's like Timothy Andrew Edwards TAE Music. And then and Tim Mosher and I, we both have a production music catalog called The Team. So you can reach either one of us on TAE at the team-llc.com, and his is tim.m at the team-llc.com.
Yeah, I mean, you can personally reach me on my dog bone website, which is eddiewohl.com. But it's easier, like Facebook, just contact me, DM me on Facebook, DM me on Instagram. I'm pretty easy to find, I think, as far as
I think. Yeah,
you
we
know.
would love to get more. We'd love to get more folks on the Evil Genius page. Start to build it. Get some. And we're quick to respond to questions and stuff like that. We're on it, so that's a great
And
way to start. And
you
yeah, I
know,
guess you could find me on socials, but
Yeah,
yeah, but
um,
I'll leave the link to the group. I feel like that's the most important thing,
that'd be
and
cool.
people will do their research. We'll also leave the team music. And I just want to say, guys, thank the three of you for being here. You all are welcome to come back whenever you want.
we'll
Whenever
hold you to
there's
that.
Yeah,
yeah,
you're
and
our
we'll
you're our
have.
very first you're our first podcast, Roy. So
There we go.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
we'll do one
you're our
for real.
first.
We'll do one in real life when I come back to LA. I don't know. I'm not sure still when it will be next year, but I'm definitely coming to LA for a longer stay this time, and I'm gonna catch you guys, and we're gonna catch up for a drink and do it for real.
Yes,
I'm
yeah, for
saying it
sure.
already, putting it
I just
into
want
Thank
existence.
you, Roy.
yeah,
thank you.
Thank you.
I
Fun.
just want to add one last thing though, if I may, just because I want to
Yeah,
push
yeah,
the boundary to the time limit here. No, I do want to say that the Evil Genius is for all levels, right? We have people who are super pros in there, right? We have great people like working composers, music supervisors, all kind of people. We also totally welcome brand new, people who are newbies to the whole thing, who are the younger part of our, their career, whatever. And don't be afraid to
No dumb
ask.
questions. Ask us anything. Yeah.
It's a safe space, because I did see someone post something, and I did see a response from a guy who's like, thank you for posting that. I was kind of nervous to post something like that in this group.
yeah.
And I was immediately like, no, man, like any question is good, right? Because if you don't know, you don't know. And if we can help you, we're here to help you.
I love it.
Absolutely.
I love it, guys. That concludes it. I would love having y'all again here, and I
I have the
salute you for
app
coming on.
now.
You know what'd be better, Roy? We should all
He's got
come.
the app.
I got the
We should
app. Come on,
we
you got to have us back. I got to use that
we
app again.
either that, or we should all three go down to Bali and hang out with you there. That sounds
Ooh,
pretty wonderful.
I'm planning on doing a retreat here. I'm just a bit scared of doing that, to be honest, at the moment. But it's just like it's gonna happen for sure. We're starting to put some things together, and yeah, a bit of imposter syndrome I'm going through right now, but it's something that's in the process, in the making. So maybe we can make something together too.
Right on,
Nice.
Cool.
man.
Cool.
Love it.
All right, thank y'all. Peace.
Roy, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.